Hello, hello! Today I want to talk about all the books that I read in the months of May and June of this year. I will say, just FYI, I read a lot of really high-rated books this couple months, so excited to talk about it. Let's just start out with the first books that I read at the beginning of May, and that is The Serpent and the Wings of Night, and then the sequel, The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. Just talking about the first one first, this is a fantasy book that everyone has been recommending. It's like super big on booktok, and I wanted to know what the hype was. So it's about our main character girl, Aurea, and she is a human daughter of the vampire king. And as a human in a vampire world, she is definitely vulnerable, she's not as powerful, and they basically are all hunting for her blood. If it wasn't for the fact that she is the king's daughter, they would probably, bite her and kill her. So she wants to enter this competition. Last one standing wins, and they win a gift from the goddess, and she wants to ask the goddess to make her a vampire. So overall, it's not a super creative fantasy book plot. It's something we've definitely seen before, but I've heard really, really good things about it. There's also a romantasy book because she meets this guy in the competition and he becomes a love interest. And when I first read it, I ate it up. It was so, so good. In fact, I actually gave this book 5 stars when I first read it. I personally just love like fighting or like training or competition. Like, I know it's cringe and has been done before, but I eat it up every time. So like I said, I originally gave it 5 stars, but over time, after thinking about it longer and longer, it just doesn't measure up, in my opinion, to other books. I probably want to give it like a 4.5 star, but in Goodreads, I rounded it down to 4 stars. It's a really good book, very entertaining, very well written, but I just think it was missing that je ne sais quoi to like put it up to the 5-star level of other books that I've read so far this year. So next I read the sequel, which is The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, and this follows the characters after the competition. I'm going to do my best to not spoil book 1, obviously, but just as a general overview, I will say that this book is much more politically based than the first one. The first one, like I said, was very much like training, fighting, competition. This one is much more like different kingdoms battling, different peoples battling for the same kingdom. That's a better way to put it. And so it's very much like, whose side are you on? Political intrigue. It was definitely interesting. I enjoyed this book too. I liked the relationships in this book. I thought they got a lot more deep in this one. However, I do think plot-wise it was just a little, not boring, but it had like a slump about the 75% mark. I was just kind of getting a little tired of it. This one I gave 4 stars straight from the jump, and I am keeping it at that. I do like this series. I think it's really good, and it's pretty easy to get into and read. It's not a super hard world, but overall it's not my favorite fantasy of all time. And so they're both high 4 stars, but just 4 stars for me. The next books probably are all in YouTube videos. I think I've talked about almost all of these before on my channel, so I will link the reading vlogs for these next couple books down in the description box below if you want to go check them out. But next I read most of the Binding 13 series by Chloe Walsh, and that took up a huge portion of this video. I almost wish I read more diverse books, but after I got into this series I was like sucked in and couldn't put it down. So starting off with Binding 13, this is the story between Johnny and Shannon. Like I said, I have a vlog for this, but in case you haven't seen it, she is in a not healthy household. Her father's abusive, and she just basically gets mistreated constantly. She also got bullied a lot at the school that she went to, which is a public school. So her parents, well, her mom, made the executive decision to dole out the money and send her to private school instead, and hopefully she'd have a better life there and not be bullied, at least at school. So she goes to this private school and she meets Johnny, and Johnny is a rugby player. I think he's the captain. I want to say he's the captain too, but I really do like this book. It was super sweet and wholesome. I mean, okay, it was also a really sad, depressing book, because like I said, she grows up in a very hard household. There's a lot of mentions of like domestic abuse and alcoholism and drugs and stuff in this book, so definitely look for your triggers in this, but I just thought this was super sweet and wholesome. Now, the one thing about this was I didn't love the writing style at first. I felt like it was very boring and kind of amateur. Like, for example, the first scene in this book is like getting ready and brushing my teeth for the first day of school, and that's just very much giving like 2000s rom-com and very much cliche, has been done before. That being said, as the books go on in the series, the writing style does get better in my personal opinion. So the first book I did give 4 stars for that little reason, but I'm obsessed with the characters and the found family in this series. Moving on to book 2, this is Keeping 13, and I actually gave this one 5 stars. This was a fantastic book for me. I liked the way that they summed up everything. I thought Johnny and Johnny's parents especially were just really, really helpful characters in this part of the book. I thought the story was definitely sad. Like, there were some really hard moments in this book, but I think it had a very well tied together ending. So that's one thing I like about this series, is even though the books themselves are really sad, they do have a happily ever after at the end. They're kind of long books, but but I do really recommend them if you can watch the trigger warnings. So this one, fantastic, 5 stars. Next, I went into the next part of the series, which is a different couple. It follows Joey and Aoife. So Joey is the older brother of Shannon, and Aoife is just another person in school. So the next book I read was Saving Six, and this is their relationship, or the start of their relationship. And it's interesting because they actually met in first year, which in UK is first year, and here at the US it's like 7th grade. It follows their story over the next 6 years, basically, in the first book, because they really didn't talk very much the first couple of years. So it's just a couple of little snippets of interactions, and then over the years as they become friends and get closer, there's a lot more chapters because they have more experiences together, and then they finally blossom into a romance towards the end of the book. So most of that happens before and then during the beginning of Johnny and Shannon's story, and then the second book picks up, which is Redeeming Six. I'll put it over here, and that book picks up right after Saving Six ends, and that is the rest of Johnny and Shannon's story, and then after it, and they overlap on top of those, Joey and Aoife's story. So basically what I'm saying here is they're interlocking timelines, and it was so fun to see the same interactions with Johnny and Shannon but from a different point of view, aka Aoife or Joey's point of view. But also I just love their romance so much more than Johnny and Shannon's. I like Johnny and Shannon, they're very wholesome, but Joey and Aoife go through so much more. There is a lot of drug usage here, there is a lot of like fighting, brutality, domestic abuse, because Joey was the one that really stood up for the rest of his siblings in front of his father. So he and his father fought a lot, and it is hard to read about, I'm not gonna lie, but I just really love his character like so much. Oh my gosh, my headband is slipping off my head and making me look like a sailor. Okay, that's a little better. Okay, sorry. Yeah, overall I had reading vlogs for these 2 books too, and I did stop at the end of Saving Six, and it's just a mess, but overall it's a fantastic book. Okay, it's so good. These were 5 out of 5, 6 out of 5 stars. In fact, these were the favorites for me out of the entire series, even compared to the first 2. So yeah, highly recommend, but watch your trigger warnings. Okay, next I finally moved on to a different series. There is more in the Biting 13 series. Taming 7 is already out, and there are more books to come, but I decided to put a pause on it and come back to it later. I needed something else, so I switched to a different type of dark romance, and I switched to mafia romance. So I've been reading mafia romance for years, and a couple years ago, I think like 3 years ago, I read the Boston Underworld, or the first 3 books of the Boston Underworld series, which is a very simple mafia book in Boston. Not a crazy plot, it's every other mafia romance. But the first book I decided to reread this month because I wanted something different, something very easy and fast-paced. So this follows Crow and Mac. Crow is the mafia mob boss. He's not like the head of the Irish mafia, but he's pretty high up there, and he runs a couple of like the bars that the mafia owns. And then Mackenzie's sister used to work in his bar but went missing a year ago, so she's been looking desperately for her. She's been, you know, contacting the police, and they're not helping. So she says, you know what, I'm gonna take things in my own hands and do them myself. So she sets out to get a job at the bar, that way she can kind of infiltrate the system and find out what happened to her sister. And since this is a mafia romance, you can see where I'm going with this. She makes a connection with Crow, and there's romance there as well, along with other elements of like trying to figure out the mystery about what happened with her sister. It's not like a whodunit, okay? The primary focus of this book is the romance, but there is an underlying mystery factor as well. This is really entertaining. I have vlog clips of this one too in my Reading Realistically for a Week video. I was obsessed with this. I remember loving it a couple years ago, but I didn't really remember any of the details of the plot, and rereading it I was like reminded of it. Mackenzie is one of my favorite girl characters. She is just so headstrong and so funny to read about. She's just so cool. So I really love Mackenzie. I would just like giggle into the entire book. So this one I gave 4 stars. I really did enjoy it. I thought it was a really good book, but I just think that it didn't give me that 5-star energy. It was just really fun, fast-paced, and entertaining. It was also slightly predictable. So 4 stars, but still really good. Like I said, everything so far has been either 4 or 5 stars this month, which is fantastic. And then after that, I put a pause on that series and went and read something else, or finished something else. And that was The Tattooist of Auschwitz. So I actually started this book before I read Crow, but I finished it afterwards. It took me a little longer to finish. But this is a historical fiction based on a true story about the Holocaust. So this follows a guy named Lale. Now I, in my reading vlog, kept saying Lael, and then at the end of this book, I actually listened to the audiobook to finish it, and then the guy pronouncing his name said Lale instead, and I was like, oh my gosh, I spent the entire vlog saying Lael when it was Lale. So maybe that's a little embarrassing, but Lale is the main character here, and he is a prisoner in Auschwitz, but because he can speak like I think 5 different languages, they make him him the tattooer, or they say tattooer, I think. I don't want to butcher it. I don't speak German or Polish or anything, so I don't want to butcher it, but he becomes a tattooist in Auschwitz. So he's the one that's like writing the numbers on their arms for the prison inmate numbers. And then he also meets this girl named Gita, who becomes basically the love interest. And this is a true story, so Lale and Gita were real people, and it's just really heartbreaking to hear their story, but also really sweet, because even though it is a really sad story, I will say that it does have a happy ending, so don't worry, okay? Listening to the author's note at the end when she talked about like interviewing Lale and his experience talking and telling his story, which she then interpreted into a fiction book, was just really beautiful. I did have problems with this book, however, even though it was really sweet, because the writing style was just not for me. It was very much cut and dry, tell not show, and I just didn't really feel connected to the characters. The only reason I kept reading was because the plot. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Now I can't really say something about someone's personal experience. Obviously they tell their story. The writing style was the main reason that I got docked points here, so 3 stars, but I do still recommend if you want a relatively short and interesting historical fiction book about the Holocaust. And then the last book that I read this month, I went back to the Boston Underworld series and I picked up book 2, which is called Reaper. So I didn't actually vlog this one, I just read it last week, and this one is also similar in that it's fast-paced and entertaining. However, this one I think I've switched my opinions about. When I first read this series 3 years ago, I preferred book 2, Reaper, over book 1, Crow. I liked the characters more, mostly because I liked Ronan more. Ronan is the MMC in this book, and he is just really broody, silent, has a very dark past, and so he is definitely like more in his shell compared to Lachlan from book 1, who was very extroverted and out there. However, I think after reading it for a second time, I do prefer book 1, because book 2 is, unfortunately, it does give me a little bit of secondhand embarrassment sometimes. Like I said, Ronan had a hard past, and so he's not as like socially aware because he wasn't grown up in a normal society, and so there are a couple like scenes where he's kind of being awkward with Sasha, who is the girl character, and she also works at the club that Mackenzie works at. He's just kind of protective over her. There are a couple of scenes that I'm just like embarrassed for them kind of thing, and that turned me off a little bit. Now I still did enjoy this book a lot. Really nice story. Like I said, fast, entertaining. It's a mafia book. It's not anything crazy. There's also elements of like sick mom in this book. Sasha has a sick mother. I think she has cancer, and so that's definitely a trigger warning if you don't want to read about that. It's not an easy thing to read about, but that also is in this book. I did give this book 4 stars. Like I said, really enjoyable, but I think if I had to rank them after reading it for a second time, Crow would be my favorite, followed by Reaper. So those are all the books that I read. Currently I am working through other books that are going to be in my July reading wrap up, well, July and August. I picked up Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas, which I literally just started it last night, but it's super fast paced, super fun. It's an age gap, girl's boyfriend's dad trope. Something new, something fun. I'll let you guys know how that book goes in a future video, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. I post about every 4 days on this channel, and I've been loving making videos for you guys. And also last night I just went on a huge book shopping spree. I bought a ton of books with my birthday money that I got a couple weeks ago, so look out for a huge book haul video coming very soon. I can't wait to talk about those books with you guys. That being said, I wish you guys an amazing day. Like I said, subscribe, and I will see you in 4 days for a new video. Goodbye.